Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 30th of September of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with the western part of Ukraine. Today we got a lot of very important and very necessary updates that tell us a lot of things and describe us the current situation in this region. And first update, we're going to talk about the area in Vinnytsia. The Russians, as a result of another airstrike with missiles or with Gerань, managed to destroy Ukrainian ammo depot in this area. That was an old Soviet ammo depot that probably was upgraded and supported by the Ukrainian forces. And when talking about this area before the special military operation, the Ukrainians had there around 83,000 of tons of munition. Obviously, the Ukrainians managed to use all of that munition during the special military operation, and currently the Ukrainians were trying to keep there the Western weapons, Storm Shadow missiles and many other types of weapons. Also, the Russian sources are saying that currently the Ministry of Defense and Russian forces are trying to find and hunt the Ukrainian ammo depot where located attacks missiles. So basically this is the part, an episode of another hunting day for attack missiles in this area. Another important update is coming from the western part of Ukraine, from the most western probably region, from Ivano-Frankivsk. And today, as a result of special operation in this area, the Russian special forces managed to destroy the gas pipeline. And the most important the most important part of that operation is that the Russians destroyed the gas pipeline not with missile strike or with Gerань strike. That was a reconnaissance team, that was a sabotage team, and that sabotage team destroyed the gas pipeline, and after that somehow they made or destroy another area, or that situation was connected. Also the Russians destroyed the oil refinery area in the same city. When talking about this oil refinery, let's zoom in. We see that it's a very powerful big factory, big plant that Ukrainians use to produce fuel for tanks and many other types of weapon and vehicles, and this is a very big loss for the Ukrainians. But this is not the most important part, that the Russians sabotage team managed to get so deep inside of the western part of Ukraine, and as a result, some sources are saying that as a result of FPV drone strike, the Russians managed to destroy first the gas pipeline, and after that the Russians managed to destroy the oil refinery. The most important question that give us, to be more precise, the most important detail that give us a lot of answers to the questions that we discussed in the previous videos: why the Russians haven't destroyed this oil refinery with missile strike, or why the Russians haven't destroyed this oil refinery with Gerань. And the answer to this question is very simple. Basically, as I understand, the Russians don't have possibilities to attack this territory with Gerань, either with Gerань drones and missiles, and this area is probably under very heavy protection of Western air defense, and this is the only secured island on the entire territory of Ukraine where the Ukrainians do have possibilities to hide equipment, to hide munition. Also, this is Karpaty rocks area, and there are lots of underground tunnels. If you remember, a few days ago we discussed about the Ukraine air defense, and we made some kind of conclusion that probably this is the most secured area where the Russians can get. And today the Russians provided us very important information, that there are no barriers for them, and if they can't get any region with missiles or Gerань, then they will get this territory with sabotage forces. And this is very important, because nobody knows how many sabotage groups are located on this territory of Ukraine. Now we are moving to the south to Kherson direction, and we got a lot of updates from this territory as well. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces all over the Dnipro shore, the bank of Ukrainian river, and as a result of those strikes they managed to destroy a significant number of ammo depots, concentration of Ukrainian forces. And the question one more time that we're asking ourselves every single day: what is the purpose of the Russians' attacks in this area? And the purpose probably obvious: to destroy ammo depots. The next question we have: what is the purpose of the Ukrainians to concentrate significant number of forces on this direction? And the question also probably is the simple as the Ukrainians are planning to start offensive operation. They're planning to cross Dnipro River, and for example, today the sources are saying, the Ukrainian sources reported that the Ukrainians have confirmed and scheduled the next phase of special military operation, of the next Ukrainian phase of counter-offensive operation, and the next operation is going to take place exactly in Kherson direction. And this is the reason why the Ukrainians are trying to concentrate forces. Furthermore, the Russian military expert Rybar reported that since the beginning of these months and August, the Ukrainians have been redeploying their forces almost every single day. More and more trucks with infantry with troopers were moving in direction of Kherson. And he reported that for the previous 2 days, the sources on the ground haven't mentioned even a single truck with infantry, which means that Ukrainians completed the mission operation of concentration of forces. Now they're waiting for one thing: to get an order, and then they will start. Furthermore, when talking about the global scope of this situation, we need to understand that Ukrainians currently have already 2 footholds on the Russian side of Dnipro River. For example, today the Russians published the video on how they were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions with TOS flamethrower systems on the Russian side of Dnipro River. Significant strikes, a very big amount of missiles were sent in this direction. Probably significant losses and damage the Russians managed to deal, but damage is not important. The most important that this territory remains under Ukrainian control. As far as I know, as far as I remember, the Ukrainians managed to cross Dnipro River in this area a few weeks ago. The Russians started bombing this area then, but as we see, they haven't managed to force the Ukrainians to step back. So this is the first bridgehead of the Ukrainian forces along this railway bridge in the vicinity, in front of Pridniprovsk. The second foothold that Ukrainians have on the Russian side of the river is the settlement by the name of Dachi, that located along Antonovsky Bridge. Of course, there is a very big distance between, let's say, Dachi and Oleshki, around less than 4 kilometers, a little bit less. And of course, between the city in Pridniprovska and Pishanovka, there is around 3 kilometers, but this is not so big, and this is the foothold on the Russian side. And currently the engineering forces of the Ukrainian side in this area try to establish like fortifications, to dig in deeper, to prepare the foothold for further waves of attacks. Nobody knows the exact situation in the vicinity of Kazachia Lahri, and if you remember, in August the Ukrainians managed to capture, or at least to enter the city. They tested the Russians' defense, and they realized that there are a lot of like black holes in Russian defense, so that's why they were so successful. And nobody knows the exact number of Ukrainian forces that have been already redeployed to the islands between the Russian bank and Ukrainian bank in the river, between the cities like Berislav, Veselaya, Drakamyanka, like Kherson on Russian side, Mykolaievka. If you ask my opinion, I believe that there are already hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers in this area, hundreds that expect the beginning of this operation, upcoming operation. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on Kherson directions, but there are no clashes as a result of air bombings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 40 soldiers and 3 armored vehicles. I believe that this is significant losses, of course. Now we are moving to Zaporizhzhia direction, and today we got significant number of very interesting details and updates from this direction. And when talking about the Ministry of Defense, they're saying that Ukrainians lost 30 soldiers, which means that the real actions and in the area is completely leveled, this intensifying of any actions. So we see from the Ministry of Defense that there are no activity, but when talking about geolocated videos and so on, we see a very heavy activity, very high activity, either from the Russian or from the Ukrainian side. Today the Ukrainian sources published another video of HIMARS strike against the concentration of Russian forces in the vicinity of Tokmak. They discovered from drone the Russian forces, and after that they made a HIMARS strike, and as a result of that strike, probably at least 1 truck was destroyed, and probably some soldiers were wounded or even killed. Another update is coming from Tokmak. The Ukrainian sources and the Russian sources reported that as a result of friendly fire, the Russians shot down its own Su-35 airplane. Of course, a very big problem and loss for Russian air forces, and according to information we have, 2 pilots died as a result of that situation. When talking about Orekhov itself, itself. As you can see, according to the icons, we have significant number of videos and geolocated videos. We will start with the video that was provided us by the Lost Armor Telegram resource and internet resource. The author of this channel asked the soldiers on the ground to make more detailed videos about the situation along the road of death. And as you can see on this video, significant number of destroyed Ukrainian armored vehicles, dozens, maybe even hundreds of armored vehicles the Ukrainians lost during their attempts to attack and to penetrate the Russians' defense belt. If you ask my opinion, I don't understand where exactly the Ukrainians managed to collect such a big number of forces, and now they lost these forces, and currently they're planning to make more operation. The question where they're going to take more weapon, I don't know, but anyway, we see what we see, but the Ukrainians also continue their offensive operation, and currently the Ukrainians are mainly focused on Robotyne. To be more precise, the Ukrainians are completely focused in direction of Kopany, and they have already made a lot of things to develop their positions in direction of Kopany. The Ukrainians published the video of the first phase of preparation before offensive operation in this direction. The Ukrainian FPV drones, squads and platoons attacked the Russian armored vehicles, artillery positions, the Russian warehouses, and the Russian strongholds and shelters in this direction. As the results of those strikes, the Russians did lose some number of forces, some video cameras, and many other important equipment. So that was the Ukrainian preparation. Before any attack, according to the modern warfare, first you try to clear the territory with FPV drones, then with artillery systems, and only after that you're launching your troopers and assault troopers and infantry to clear the territory and to capture this territory completely. And the Ukrainians managed to complete the first phase, and after that the Ukrainians tried to concentrate their forces in two areas. In the northern area and the north of Robotyne, this is the first area where the Ukrainians tried to concentrate their forces, and the second area is the southern fortification of Robotyne. So on these two areas the Ukrainians tried to concentrate their forces with the purpose to attack in direction of Kopany from two directions, from the northern direction and from the southern direction. But the Russians managed to discover this plan, and one more time, according to my understanding, the Ukrainians were planning to develop their bridgehead as close as possible to Kopany, and basically to maintain their foothold and to maintain the flanks on Robotyne bridgehead. I don't think that Ukrainians are able to capture Kopany, but at least they can get as close as possible. So they have concentrated their forces. The Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian plans, and as soon as they discovered, they start bombing and attacking the concentration of the Ukrainian forces on the south using the TOS flamethrower systems. As a result of those strikes, probably significant number of Ukrainian armored vehicles and infantry, basically infantry, were destroyed, and basically the Russians managed to achieve the most important purpose, to break the operation and not to allow the Ukrainians to continue. When talking about the northern direction, the Russians were using Grad systems, it's multi-launch rocket systems. Also, the purpose was to force the Ukrainians to step back, not to allow them to concentrate forces for further offensive operation. And basically the Russians managed to achieve that success, that goal. When talking about other details from this territory today, some sources published the map of fire anomalies in this area. So I'll remind you that every single orange and red square in this territory means some fire anomaly. This might be destroyed armored vehicle or the smoke after TOS flamethrower strike and so on. From this perspective, from this angle, it's very difficult to understand where exactly every single fire took place. But when talking about this map, this fire took place exactly in this white cloud, in this white sector. So the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russian positions, not just with FPV drones but also with artillery strikes. Then they tried to attack, but that attack was repelled by the Russians. When talking about Verbovo, we don't have nothing from this direction. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces along the trenches, the forces who are currently trying to dig in deeper to concentrate some forces, but we see that there are no progress from the Ukrainian side at all. And I'm not even sure that Ukrainians are going to do anything in this direction until they maintain their positions on the western part of Robotyne. Now we are moving to the north, and before we start discussion Vremivka tactical bridgehead, we got some updates from Huliaipole area. Today the Russian sources published the video how they were bombing the forest line, tree line, in the vicinity of Dorozhnyanka on the south of Huliaipole with TOS flamethrower systems. And you know that starting from August and September, we start receiving more and more geolocated videos and updates from this direction. For example, since the beginning of September, we got at least 3 or 4 geolocated videos with different types of strikes, mainly artillery strikes against the Ukrainian fortifications in Ukrainian shelters. And furthermore, the Russian military expert Ryber also confirms that Ukrainians recently managed to redeploy a significant number of forces of unknown brigades, so they haven't managed to classify them, exactly in direction of Huliaipole. And currently the Ukrainians are doing one thing: they try to maintain the gray zone and to get as close as possible to the Russian positions. So currently, as I understand, there is no question whether the Ukrainians are going to attack from Huliaipole to the south or not. The question is when the Ukrainians are going to launch this attack. Because if you ask my opinion, I expected that Ukrainians will start their offensive operation from Huliaipole since the beginning of their greatest offensive operation, but they haven't done this, and now we see concentration of forces, and probably they will try their luck in this direction as well. So we'll see. Now we're moving to Vremivka tactical bridgehead to the south Donetsk direction. The level of losses on this area is very heavy still, 120 soldiers during the previous 24 hours. But when talking about the most important updates is that Ukrainians always use the same pattern. When they're not attacking, they try to be calm as possible. They're not using FPV drones, they're not using nothing. But when the Ukrainians know that in a day or in 2 or in a week they need to start offensive operation, they start pressing and pushing and attacking this area with all types of weapons they have. On this video, very long video, we saw a lot of updates regarding attacks from the Ukrainian side against the Russian tanks, fortifications and shelters. On this video, we see how the Ukrainians discovered Russian ammo depot and destroyed this ammo depot with mortar strike. So they intensify their actions, and probably we are going to see more updates, and after a few days of such a kind of preparation, the Ukrainians will launch another suicide operation to the south in direction of Staromlynovka. But the Russians understand that Zelensky have confirmed and scheduled October operation. And now, at least when talking about the information from open source, the Ukrainians are planning to cross Dnipro, the Ukrainians are planning to attack in Kopany, the Ukrainians are planning to restart their offensive operation in Staromlynovka, a lot of attacks, and as I understand, the Russians just want to be secured on the safe side, and they want, of course, to break the Ukrainian plans, and the only way how to break the plans is to ruin enemies' logistics. So when talking about the Russian ideas. And today the Russians published the video how they managed to destroy the bridge in the Velika Novoselovsk area, the only bridge that normal bridge that Ukrainians used for supporting and supplying their forces during the previous waves of attacks in direction of on Vremivka tactical bridgehead, and that bridge was destroyed. Of course, this is not going to solve the Russian problems in this area, but at least with this attack, with this destroyed bridge, they managed to win at least a few days that Ukrainians need to create pontoon bridge to secure them and so on. And if the Russians are able to control the Ukrainian pontoon bridges, of course they can even break the entire operation. And this, of course, is not going with the Ukrainian plans. Now we're moving to the south Donetsk direction, and we got also a lot of updates. The Russians continue ruining the settlements like Novomikhailivka with FAB bombs. Today they attack this city at least with 4 FAB bombs. We know that currently the Russians are trying to capture the stronghold on the north by the name of Zverinets. Currently they are trying to storm this area, and all these bombings has one certain purpose: to pin down the Ukrainians and not to allow them to redeploy some reserves to the north. And as I understand, the Russians are pretty successful because they were attacking not Novomikhailivka, also the Russians attacked the city of Paraskovievka, not just with FAB bombs, but also with Lumur missile, Lemur missile, I remind you, is a type of missile that the Russians can use from helicopters and to attack the Ukrainian positions from hidden positions. So the distance of these missiles is more than 50 kilometers, and so this is a perfect weapon to attack the buildings and to not to get into the area of Ukrainian air defense forces. So this area has been almost reduced to ruins, but this is an ongoing process. I believe tomorrow we're going to see more photos, but I expect and wait some more details, more updates from Zverina stronghold, because this is like strategical area and the operation of storming of course have already started. When talking about Mariinka direction, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian concentration of forces between Kurakhova and Krasnogorovka. On this video we see how the Russians discovered the Ukrainian Grad system, and as a result of Krasnopol strike, accurate Krasnopol strike, one shot, they managed to destroy the Ukrainian artillery system. So the situation is like this, and this is not the first video from this area, of course. A little bit to the south, the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian EW, electronic warfare equipment that Ukrainians used to break and to not to allow the Russian FPV drone operators to work, and they managed to discover and destroy it. And when talking about Donetsk direction, the Russians reported that as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 430 soldiers, one of the heaviest losses since the beginning of this operation, of course. Significant number of losses, and probably the losses took place mainly in the vicinity of Donetsk and of course in the vicinity of Bakhmut, Artyomovsk. And today another battle started. The Ukrainians a few days ago finished the battle for Andreevka, or at least they think so. Currently this area is in the gray zone, but Ukrainians claim that they control this territory. But before I start making this video, the Russians published the video how the Russians like reconnaissance team moved some explosives to this area, but never mind. But currently the most important and the most heavy clashes are taking place in this area on the north of Klishchiivka, and the main purpose of the Ukrainians is to capture this territory. I'll mark you with the cloud, this one. Currently this is the most important area that Ukrainians are trying to capture, to storm. They started this operation a few days ago, and from this area we got at least a lot of geolocations. First of all, the Ukrainians were trying to capture this territory with just regular infantry, and they sent a lot of platoons, a lot of storm squads, 5-6 soldiers. And for example, as a result of first few waves of attacks, the Ukrainians were defeated, and a lot of Ukrainians were captured by special unit Akhmat, and they became prisoners of war. After the Russians shown their resistance in this area, the Ukrainians discovered the Russian positions and started bombing them, and for a very long time with cluster rounds. We got a lot of videos how the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russians with cluster rounds, and after that they decided that this territory was cleared, and they start sending their armored vehicles in this direction. And as a result of one of those attacks with armored vehicles, the Russians managed to destroy another Ukrainian tank. So currently after Andreevka, this small forest line is going to be the most important area of another episode of fierce and bloody clashes for Bakhmut and Artyomovsk. So we'll see, because I believe that the next days is going to be, most of the updates are going to come exactly from this area. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainians in Ivano-Frankivsk. Very powerful strikes and artillery explosions took place there. The Russians continue bombing the Ukrainian positions in Konstantinovka with FAP 1500s, very powerful bombings. And the Russians continue bombing the cities like Kramatorsk, like Konstantinovka, and so on. So they control the situation and try not to allow the Ukrainians to get benefits from their positions. When talking about Liman area, there are no changes on the ground. The only important thing that we need to discuss is that the Russians also started demining process in this area, and with the Zmei Gorynich demining equipment, they tried to prepare safe roads for upcoming offensive operation in this area as well. When talking about Kupiansk, one more time, as a result of another strike, the Russians destroyed another bridge, another pontoon area that Ukrainians were using to supply and support their forces. Obviously, the entire logistic of this region has been collapsed by the Russian strikes. And when talking about the global scope, as a result of clashes in this area, as a result of artillery strikes, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers on Kupiansk and Liman area together, around 7 armored vehicles and 4 artillery systems. So the level of losses is normal. Not like normal, the level of losses is the same, is the normal for this for this front line. Well, of course, in comparison with our other areas, of course, it's nothing, but for this area, it's a regular picture. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.